He won a cursed homestead for a nickel. 2 blind twins guarded the cellar. The nickel was still warm from the other man's pocket when I palmed it off the table. That was the whole pot, 1 nickel, a land deed folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth, and the laughter of 3 men who figured they'd watched a fool win himself a burden. The deed was for a homestead out past the Garnet Range, a place called the Aldrich Parcel, 47 acres of high grass and 1 creek, and a sod house nobody'd slept in since a family named Aldrich stopped being a family. The man who lost it to me, Tully his name was, a drover with a sunburned neck and watery eyes. He'd laughed louder than the rest when I raked in that deed. "I've been trying to lose that property for 2 years, he said. "Congratulations, you got yourself a curse." I told him I didn't believe in curses. He said that was fine. The land didn't need me to believe. I rode out 3 days later. Didn't have anywhere else to go, and a man in my position, a man the whole territory knew by a name I am not going to say here, because the whole point of riding out to cursed Homestead is to stop being that man. A man like that doesn't have too many options. You either keep moving until someone stops you permanent, or you find a hole and pull it in after you. I'd been moving for 11 years. I was tired enough to try the hole. The Garnet Range in October is the color of rust and old bone. I rode through 2 days of that and 1 night of hard frost that turned the grass white, and I came over a low rise in the gray morning, and there was the Aldrich parcel laid out below me like something a man had given up on carefully. The sod house was still standing. The roof had a sag to it but hadn't come in. The creek ran thin and clear. There was a barn with half its boards gone and a root cellar dug into a hillside 20 yards south, door made of iron-strapped wood, closed. I sat on my horse and looked at it. It looked like nothing. It looked like exactly the kind of place where a man could stop mattering. I rode down. I was unsaddling at the hitching post, such as it was, just a lodgepole lashed between 2 uprights when I heard them. Not voices exactly. More like the sound of something being moved with purpose. A scrape of iron against stone, rhythmic, not hurried. It was coming from the root cellar. I left the horse and walked toward it with my hand not on my gun, because I'd decided 3 days ago to stop doing that. The scraping continued. I got within 10 yards of the cellar door and stopped. "I know you're there," a woman's voice said from behind the door. "I can hear your boots on the frost." I said, "Door's closed." "Sound carries through iron hinges," she said. "Always has." The door opened from the inside, and she came up the stone steps with a cast-iron pot in both hands, moving like she knew every inch of those stairs, which she did, I'd come to understand. She was maybe 40, brown hair gone to gray at the temples, wearing a canvas coat too big for her. Her eyes were open and fixed on a point 2 feet to my left, and they didn't move when I moved. "You're the new owner," she said. It wasn't a question. I said I supposed I was. "Tully finally lost it." She set the pot down on the flat stone outside the cellar. Whatever was in it smelled like rendered fat and old herbs. "We figured he would. He's been trying." I said, "We." "My sister and I," she said. "Nara, I'm Calla. We've been on this parcel since before Tully won it from the Aldrich boy, and we'll likely be on it after you're done with it too, so you might as well know that now." I looked at the cellar door. I looked at her. "Your sister's in there." "She's having a day," Calla said, and said it in a way that meant she wasn't going to explain further. I didn't push. I'd been alive long enough to know when a door was closed. That first week I mostly worked. There is something a man can do with his hands when his head won't quiet, not thinking, just doing, and the Aldrich parcel had 47 acres worth of not thinking available. I reseeded 4 roof poles. I repacked the south wall of the barn where the mud had crumbled. I found where the creek was undermining the bank near the garden plot and cut sod and rocked it up. I didn't sleep much, but I slept better than I had in years, which wasn't saying a great deal. Calla came up from the cellar each morning around first light and each evening near dark. She moved in a precise orbit around the property, 12 steps from the cellar door to the flat stone, another 9 to the garden plot, 24 from the garden to the sod house door. She had it mapped in her feet. If I left something in her path, she found it with a toe before she found it with her face, and she'd move it back where it came from without comment. We didn't talk much those first days. I'd nod and she couldn't see it, so I took to saying a word or two instead. "Morning, cold one," that sort of nothing. She'd answer in kind. Once I asked her if she needed anything from town. I was making a supply run, and she said salt and a pound of dried beans if I could manage it, which I could. And I brought them back and set them on the flat stone, and she said thank you without being told they were there. I asked her later how she knew. You came back lighter than you left, she said. Saddlebags, and you smelled like town. The sister Nara I didn't see for 5 days. I heard her some nights. A low sound, not crying exactly, more like someone arguing with something only she could hear. Once a crash of something ceramic. Calla didn't react when I heard it, just kept on with whatever she was doing by the feel of it. On the 6th day, Nara came up the cellar steps in the afternoon. She was identical to Calla in every feature I could name, same height, same brown-gray hair, same set to the jaw, but the resemblance stopped at the surface. Where Calla moved with that mapped certainty, Nara moved like every step was a negotiation. Her blind eyes tracked the air in a different way, restless, searching something not there. She stood at the top of the cellar steps and turned her face toward me where I was splitting wood near the barn. "You're still here," she said. I said I was. "Tully left after 2 weeks," she said. "Man before him left after 1. I kept splitting. I'm not in a hurry." Nara considered that. She had a way of going very still that her sister didn't like listening, like she was running the words through some interior test before she decided what to do with them. "You're the man they call Dex Hollowell," she said. I set them all down. "I heard you the first night," she said. "You talk in your sleep. You said that name, apologized to it." I picked them all back up. "That's not my name anymore." Nara turned and went back down the steps. The iron door closed behind her. Calla, who had been on the far side of the garden, said, "Don't mind her, she tests everyone." I said, "Does she come up much?" "When she's well," Calla said. "When she's not, she stays down. It's been that way since we were girls. Cold is worse. Winter will be hard." I asked her what was wrong with Nara, and I said it plain because Calla didn't seem like a woman who wanted things dressed up. Calla was quiet a moment, fingers working through the dead bean plants, clearing the row. "Nothing's wrong with her," she said. "She just carries more than I do, always has. Some people are built to carry more, doesn't mean they're broken." I thought about that. I thought about it a lot the next few weeks. Here is what I knew about myself by October of that year, and I knew it the same way you know the weight of a revolver you've carried for 11 years. Bone deep, past thinking. I knew I was good at one thing, and that thing had made me famous, and that fame had made me a target, and being a target had made me better at the thing, and all of it together had made me into something I did not want to be. I'd left 3 towns ahead of men looking to build their reputation on mine. I'd drawn against boys who couldn't grow a proper beard, and I had not lost, and I had hated that I hadn't lost, because what it meant was I'd keep not losing, and the boys would keep coming. There is a kind of trap that looks like winning. I'd been in it for 11 years. I hadn't touched my gun since I crossed onto the Aldrich parcel. I'd put it in the bottom of my saddlebag, and I'd left the saddlebag on the peg inside the sod house, and I didn't look at it. What I was trying to figure out, through the work of my hands and the shortening of the days, was whether there was anything left of me that wasn't Dex Hollowell. Whether the man underneath had survived being Dex Hollowell. I genuinely did not know. Calla, for her part, didn't ask. I can't explain what that was. To a man who'd been watched and tracked and counted and measured for more than a decade, someone simply not asking was like setting down a load you've been so long carrying you forgot it'd weight. She'd bring coffee out to where I was working some mornings. She'd find me by sound and set the cup on whatever flat surface was near, and she'd stay a few minutes or she wouldn't, and she never once asked me what I'd done or who I'd killed or whether the stories were true. She just saw to things. I was a man on her land, working on her land, and she saw to me the way she saw to the land. The 3rd week of October, I was mending a fence line on the east edge of the property, and I tore my hand open on a rusted wire. Not badly, but deep enough. I wrapped it in my kerchief and finished the post and walked back, and Calla was outside the sod house when I came in, and she said, without my saying a word about it, "Let me see your hand." I started to ask how she knew. "You're walking wrong," she said. "Come here." She cleaned the cut with water and an astringent that smelled like pine resin, and she bandaged it with cloth she tore from a flour sack, working by touch, each fold exact. My hand in both of hers. Her fingers were calloused from work and certain in the way they moved, and I sat on the stump she'd pulled over for a seat, and I didn't say anything for a while. Does it bother you? I said eventually, knowing who I am. She finished the last fold and pressed it. I know what you were, she said. I don't know who you are. I didn't have an answer for that. Nara said you apologized to the name in your sleep, she said. I thought about that. A man who apologizes to who he used to be, that's a man trying to separate himself from it. She released my hand. That's not nothing. I looked at my hand in its wrapping. It doesn't bother you, I said again, not a question this time. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, a blind woman on a cursed homestead doesn't have a lot of room to be particular. She said it dry, and after a second I laughed, and I hadn't laughed in I don't know how long. It felt strange in my chest, like a door opening in a room that had been shut. She didn't smile exactly, but something shifted in her face, like she was satisfied. November came in hard. 2 feet of snow by the 6th, and the temperature down past anything I'd seen south of Montana. I banked the sod house walls with sod and straw, and I cut wood until my shoulders were spent, and I cut more. Calla insisted on keeping the cellar for her and Nara, not because of me but because of Nara, who couldn't manage the sod house stairs in her bad spells, and the cellar was familiar and the familiar helped her. I had the sod house, close enough to hear them if something went wrong. We'd worked that out practical, no sentiment to it. Nara had been worse since the first snow. I could hear her some nights through the cellar door when I was outside checking the stock, that low arguing sound, but sharper now, more urgent. Once she came up in the middle of the night and Calla went down to get her, and I heard her voice down there, slow and even the same words again and again, something I couldn't make out. By morning, Nara was quieter. I asked Calla one morning over coffee if there was anything I could do when Nara got like that. She thought about it honestly, which I appreciated. Sometimes, she said, just knowing someone is nearby helps her, not in the cellar, just close. So on the bad nights, I'd move my bedroll near the sod house door, which put me maybe 30 feet from the cellar. I'd have the stove going and the door cracked, and I'd listen. It probably did nothing. Maybe it did something. Hard to say. One night in mid-November, Nara came up and sat on the flat stone in the snow, which she did sometimes. The cold seemed to settle her. And I was outside by the woodpile, and she said, without preamble, "You ever get tired of being the thing everyone's afraid of?" I said I was tired of it before it started. Why'd you do it so long then? Didn't know how to stop, I said. And then I couldn't. Once enough people know your name, you can't outrun it. Nara considered the dark in front of her. The snow was still coming down, slow and light. We've been on this land 17 years, she said. People in Garnet think we're a haunting, 2 blind women in a root cellar. They tell their children about us. I heard something like that, I said. Does that bother you, staying with a haunting? I said no. She was quiet. Good, she said, and went back down the steps. I don't know exactly when I understood that these 2 women had chosen the parcel the same way I'd come to it. Not as a place they'd settled, exactly, but as a place they'd retreated from the world's habit of making people into the simplest version of themselves. Nara, who saw things other people didn't see and frightened them for it. Calla, who moved through the dark with more certainty than most men moved through daylight, and who had learned to need nothing from the outside world so completely that the outside world had stopped mattering. They'd taken a cursed homestead, everyone's cast off, and made it into something private and theirs. I'd won it for a nickel and stumbled into the middle of it. It occurred to me that I had no intention of leaving. The weather broke in the first week of December, one of those cold, clear spells where the sky is so blue it's almost purple, and the snow throws light back up at you until your eyes ache. I was on the roof of the barn replacing boards. I'd found a stand of dry lumber in the ravine, probably aldriches, stacked under canvas, when I saw the 3 riders coming from the south. I stayed on the roof. I knew the way men ride when they're looking for something. There's a different quality to it than men just going somewhere. These 3 were looking. They crossed the rise and came down toward the homestead at the easy pace of men who weren't in a hurry because they had time and numbers both. I climbed down. Calla was at the garden plot, turning the frozen ground. She'd heard them already. She turned her face south while they were still a 1/4 mile out. I said, go to the cellar. She said no. I looked at her. I'm not going to the cellar, she said, same tone she used when she told me salt and a pound of dried beans. Even, not scared, not performative, just what was going to happen. I said, these men aren't coming for. I know what they're coming for, she said. I'm not going to the cellar. The riders came down into the yard. 3 men. One of them I recognized by shape before I recognized his face, which is how you know someone you'd rather not know. His name was Cord Pelly, and he'd been a name in the territory for 6 or 7 years, which means he'd been building toward this kind of moment for most of that time. The other 2 I didn't know. Young, the kind of young that doesn't understand yet what it costs. Cord pulled up and looked down at me from his horse and smiled. Dex, he said. I said, that's not my name. Man in Garnet says you're on this parcel, he said. Man in Garnet says Dex Hollowell won a homestead for a nickel and went to ground. I said that didn't sound like Dex. Dex doesn't go to ground. The 2 young ones had spread out to my left and right, not wide but some. I kept my hands where everyone could see them. I'm not here for trouble, I said. Nobody ever is, Cord said. He was still smiling. It was the smile of a man who'd planned this moment and was enjoying being inside the plan. But here's what I know about your reputation, Dex. You built it the same way I'm building mine. And the thing about a reputation like that, it don't let you retire. Calla moved. She didn't speak and she didn't go for anything. She just walked to where I was standing, 12 steps she'd made 1,000 times, and she stood beside me. Right beside me, close enough that her arm was against mine, and she faced the riders with her blind eyes steady and her hands at her sides and her chin level. Cord looked at her. Who the hell? This is my land, she said, her voice carried clean in the cold air. This man works my land. You have business with my land. You'll have it with me first. Cord's smile went uncertain. Men who work by reputation have trouble with people who don't register it. He looked at me. She blind. I can hear your horse breathing, Calla said. I can hear you chewing whatever's in your right cheek. I can hear the nervousness in that boy on your left. He's blinking too fast. She paused. You don't frighten me, and the man you came for isn't here. That man is done. Cord looked at me. I looked back at him. I had nothing to prove. That was the first time I'd felt that in 11 years, no need, no itch, no calculation, nothing to prove. I said, you heard her. The 2 young ones were watching Cord. Cord was watching me. A long moment with the cold sun bright off the snow and a hawk turning over the barn. Then Cord reined his horse and turned. This isn't done, he said. I didn't answer. There was nothing worth saying. They rode back over the rise and were gone. Calla didn't move for a moment after the sound of them faded. She was still facing the place where they'd been. I could see her breath in the cold air, small, even controlled. You didn't have to do that, I said. I know, she said. They might come back. They might, she said. She turned back toward the garden. But they might not. Men like that, they like the odds to be simple. We just made it complicated. She reached the garden plot and crouched and picked up her hand trowel from where she'd set it in the frozen dirt. Bring me the salt cellar from the house when you get a chance. I want to get this row done before dark. I stood in the yard for a moment with the cold in my lungs. She'd stood next to me in front of 3 armed men and told them the man they'd come to find wasn't here. Not to protect me, or maybe to protect me, yes, but not the way a person does it when they're afraid of what happens if they don't. The way a person does it when they've decided something. She decided something about me. She decided what I was worth. I went and got the salt cellar. 3 days later, this is the part that stays. We were in the sod house at evening, me at the table with a piece of tack I was mending, Calla near the stove with her mending, the lamp between us. Outside, the snow had come back, soft this time, not the hard-driving kind, and you could hear it against the window. Nara had been quiet 2 days running, which Calla said meant a good stretch was coming. I was thinking about what Cord Pelly would do and whether he'd bring more men, and whether the life I'd walked away from was just waiting for me to get tired enough to stop, and then it would be there again. I was thinking it was possible that no matter what I did, the name Dex Hollowell would find me, the way water finds the low ground, and that eventually I would run out of places to be not Dex. I was thinking this, and probably it showed because Calla set down her mending. What are you chewing on? She said. I told her, plain, the way I'd learned to talk to her. She didn't want it dressed. She listened with that quality she had of listening that meant her whole attention was on you and nothing else. When I finished, she was quiet a moment. Can I tell you what I see? She said. I said she could. I see a man, she said, who came here because he was done, not half done, not taking a rest. Done, there's a difference. A man who's half done still carries himself like what he was. You don't. She reached over and picked up her mending again, slowly. First night you were here, I heard you walk from the barn to the house. I thought that man moves like someone putting something down, like someone laying a tool they're done with. I looked at the lamp. They'll come for you as long as your deck's hollow, she said. So stop being him. I said, I don't know how. Yes, you do, she said. You've been doing it. That's what the work is. That's what every post you've set and every wall you've remudded is. She didn't look at me because she couldn't, but she turned toward me, her head angled like she was studying my face all the same. You're not that man anymore. I have never met that man. I met the man on this parcel, and that man is worth the trouble it cost him to get here. The snow against the window, the lamp between us. Calla, I said. She shook her head a little, not cutting me off, just settling. We'll figure out Cord Pelly, she said. We've been on this land through worse than a man with a grudge. Nara and me, we've outlasted 2 owners and 1 drought and a sickness that took half the valley. We'll outlast this. She looked toward me. If you stay. I said, I intend to stay. She was quiet, the mending in her hands. Then she said, good. 1 word, that's all. And I cannot tell you what it did to me, I won't try, but there it is. Cord Pelly came back 17 days later, and he came with 5 men, and it was Nara who heard them first. She came up the cellar steps at gray dawn and said, flat, 7 riders from the south, 2 are hanging back. I said, how do you know 7? Count the hooves, she said. I stood in the cold and listened, and I couldn't hear a thing, and then, far away and thin, I could. She was right, 7 horses coming slow. I went inside and took the gun from my saddlebag. I hadn't touched it in 6 weeks. It was familiar in my hand the way a tool is familiar, not comfortable, not good, just known. I checked the loads and went out. What happened in the next hour I won't run through in detail. It's not the point. The short of it is that Cord Pelly had decided to play numbers, and I am a good shot, and the 2 who hung back broke first, and that took the spine out of the rest. Nobody died, though Cord Pelly did not come out of it well and would not be making this particular ride again. A man who builds a reputation has to defend the reputation, and there comes a moment when the cost of defending it is more than a man's willing to spend. That moment came. Afterward I stood in the yard in the cold, and the 2 women were behind me, Calla's hand on Nara's arm, and the riders were gone over the south rise. I looked at the gun. I walked to the creek. It was running thin under the ice at the edges, and I found a spot where the water was deep, and I threw the gun in. It broke through the ice and went down and was gone. I don't know if that was practical, probably wasn't, but I needed to do something with my hands that was final, and that was the thing I did. When I came back, Nara said, that was your working gun. I said it was. Impractical, she said. I said I knew. Nara looked at her sister for a moment and then back at me, her blind eyes level and that testing quality gone out of them. The thing she'd been running me through for 6 weeks, whatever interior test she applied to the world. It was gone. You can borrow one of ours if you need it, she said. She went back down the steps. I looked at Calla. Calla was watching where I'd come from, the creek, like she could see through the snow and the distance to where I'd stood at the water. Her face had the quality it got when she was thinking something through to the end. How's your hand? She said. I looked at the hand she'd wrapped weeks ago. The scar was still there. Fine, I said, healed up. She nodded once. She walked to me and she put her hand against my chest, flat, palm open, and held it there. That was all. She wasn't checking if I was hurt. She wasn't steadying me. She was just doing a thing with her hand that said what she would not say in more words, that I was here, that I was a man worth standing beside, that she knew it. I put my hand over hers. We stood like that for a moment in the snow, with the cold sun coming up behind the Garnet Range. She said, come in and eat something. And I did. I'm not going to tell you the rest in the same way. Not because there isn't more, there is, years of it, more than I'd have bet on when I rode over that rise in the gray morning. But the shape of it, I can tell from here. Nara had her spells and her good stretches, and in the good stretches she was sharp-minded and often funny in a way that caught you sideways. She knew herbs and medicines, and she knew the land the way Calla knew it, by a different sense, and there were seasons where she seemed more at peace than I would have expected possible. The valley didn't stop thinking of them as a haunting, but they stopped having to care about that. The valley's opinion had never touched them much. Cord Pelly recovered and moved on west, somebody said, and then north. And then I stopped hearing his name, which is the best thing that can happen with a name like that. People in Garnet stopped expecting Dex Hollowell to come through. After a few years, they stopped expecting him at all. There was a rancher out on the Aldrich parcel, people said. Quiet man, kept to himself, fixed the place up good. That was me. That was the whole of what I was at last. The homestead changed under work the way land does when someone means it. The barn came straight. The creek bank held. The garden plot put out more than we needed 2 summers in 3. I built a second room on the sod house and then a covered porch on the south side where the winter sun hit, and Calla would sit there some afternoons with her mending, and I would sit there with nothing, just the air, and we didn't need to fill it. There are mornings I still come awake from old dreams, the sound of a hammer going back, the particular stillness of a street in the second before. Those don't go away entirely. Maybe they shouldn't. A man without scars is a man who hasn't been anywhere. But then I hear the creak. I hear the particular way the wind comes off the Garnet Range before dawn, a sound that belongs to one place and no other. I hear the stove pulling in the kitchen, and I hear Calla's step on the floor she knows by heart, 12 steps from the far wall to the stove. And by the time she brings the coffee out to where I'm sitting on the porch with my coat on and the frost on the boards, I am just a man on his land, with a good woman coming toward him through the early cold. That's all. That's everything. She finds me by the sound of my breathing, or by the creak of my chair, or by some sense I have never been able to name, and she sets the cup in my hand and her fingers are warm from the stove, and she sits down beside me. The sun comes up behind the range and lights the snow on the high peaks, and neither of us says a word.